And I know, okay, it's a sensitive subject. I know this is one of those things where me, the messenger, is definitely going to get shot because none of us were awake back in 2008. So when people were pointing out some oddities about Barack Obama, right, everyone was quick to go, oh, that's because of racism. Like, that's like, come on, this is absolutely happening because you just don't like him because he's black. And I count myself among them. I have to always remind you guys, like, I was a liberal or left-leaning. I never actually voted for Democrats, but I, too, thought that anybody that was saying anything about him was racially motivated. I cried the night that Barack Obama won. But I want to be clear. I've grown up since. I've got 3 kids now. I'm married. I'm seeing the world through a different way. I realize what the media is, and I realize how they really do think that black people are stupid. And in the retrospect, there were definitely some very weird things about Barack Obama. For example, and this is just a fact, back in 1991, when Barack Obama was completely unknown to the public, he was working with a literary agency that was named Acton and Distal, okay? They were tasked with promoting his first book, which was a book that was meant to be entitled Journeys in Black and White, which actually never wound up being published. But in anticipation of his book being published, they were promoting Barack Obama and other authors that were on their roster. And they promoted them in a booklet, which they distributed to people in the publishing industry, like, hey, here are our authors that we want you to publish. And in the booklet, they included a biography of all of their clients. And this is the biography that they included of Barack Obama. Okay, take a look here. It says, this is real, 100% real. Barack Obama, the first African-American president of the Harvard Law Review, was born in Kenya and raised in Indonesia and Hawaii. The son of an American anthropologist and a Kenyan finance minister, he attended Columbia University and worked as a financial journalist and editor for Business International Corporation. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so the whole concept of, like I said, that's 100% legit. The whole concept of whether or not he was born in Kenya was not coming out of racist ideas, right? It wasn't because people were just trying to delegitimize him. It was because he had a literary agent, and that literary agent published a pamphlet, and that pamphlet said that he was born in Kenya. And then suddenly that changed, and they were like, no, never mind. He was born in the USA. That person who published this never gave an answer for why they wrote that. They tried to say like, oh, like that maybe the literary agency just wrote that. Why would anybody just write that you're born in Kenya? It's like a weird thing to write. Okay, doesn't matter in the scheme of things. He was already president for 8 years, but it's good to go back on that. And then, of course, there was this other odd thing that happened. Like, he did, by the way, grow up in Indonesia. That's a fact, right? He, like, at the first 8 years of his life were spent in Indonesia. His mother moved him to Indonesia, and he went by a totally different name. He went by the name Barry Soetoro. Here's an old clip of journalist Matt Meager from Inside Edition revealing that truth. Just so you know, these were not conspiracies. Okay, take a listen.
As Senator Barack Obama has made his run for president, some have questioned his background, particularly the 4 years he spent as a child in Indonesia. He was educated in 2 schools, first a Catholic school and then later a public school. Matt Mahar traveled to Indonesia to take you to both of the schools the candidate attended.
This is the Assisi Catholic Grammar School in Jakarta, Indonesia. And Barack Obama is on his way to becoming its most famous former student.
Barack Obama.
The only record of Obama having attended the school is this old register. And look, it lists his name as Barry Soetoro. That's the name Obama took from his Indonesian stepfather, Lolo Soetoro.
Okay, so whatever you make of this, what we know is that Barack Obama was, first and foremost, right after she gave birth, his white mother is the person that raised him, okay? Her name is Stanley Dunham. There she is, right there. That is Stanley Dunham. Okay, he never lied about this. He did not grow up in a household with his Kenyan father at all, Barack Obama Sr., whatever. He was raised by his mother, Stanley Dunham, and then she married a person who worked for the Indonesian government as a geographer. She married Lolo Soetoro, and Barry Soetoro was born. You know, he then moved to Indonesia. He went to school in Indonesia, and then he gets sent back to Hawaii at the age of 10. So for the first 10 years of his life, I'm just going, okay, like he was not exposed to black people at all. He was exposed to Indonesians, and then he gets sent to Hawaii. to get raised by his exceedingly white grandparents. Here's a picture of his grandparents. That's Madeline Dunham and Stanley Dunham, the person whose mother has the name of her father. So then, yeah, he is in Hawaii as well. And in case you didn't know this, he was extraordinarily wealthy. You probably could figure that out by all this moving around. That's why while he was in Hawaii, he was enrolled in a private school. He attended the Punahou School, where tuition is for grades K through 12. Tuition is $31,000 per year. That's today, so you can account for inflation, okay? But that's where his grandparents enrolled him, okay? So it's important to note also that in 1970, when Barry Obama got to Hawaii, there were only 5,925 Black people in all of Hawaii. Okay. And it's worth noting that 80% of those, north of 80% of those 5,000 Black people were in the military. He was not exposed to Black people at all, is what I'm trying to make the point. Okay. He had literally not a single part of his upbringing was he around Black people. There were no students, no Black students at his very expensive private school. Okay, there's no Black people in Indonesia. And really, for those of you that haven't been to Hawaii, it's still like, it has nothing to do with America. It feels like we just took Hawaii and we're like, yeah, you're America. But when you go out there, you're like, okay, this is like its own thing entirely. They look more Asian than anything else. And they're kind of a little pissed off that we took them, if we're being completely honest about Hawaii now. So he went there. His mother went to a school that the same one that his dad went to in Hawaii, the same one that his stepdad went into Hawaii. Really kind of feels like he was a part of some weird military program. And then after that, after going to his $31,000 per year private school in Hawaii, he goes to Occidental College in Occidental University or college, whatever it is, in California for 2 years, where he roomed with a white guy for the first year, white guy with blonde hair. He's written about it for his freshman year, and then moved to live off campus in his sophomore year with a Pakistani for 1 year. His dorm mates have described him as doing a mean Mick Jagger impression. Literally, I know I've heard the name Mick Jagger, but I had no idea that he was the lead singer of the Rolling Stones until today. I was today years old when I learned that. I'm just saying, I understand, like, people grew up in a household that listened to rock and roll. I didn't grow up in that household. MJ was not Mick Jagger for us. It was Michael Jackson. The whole reason we're doing this series is because somebody came for the Jacksons. That's the kind of household I grew up in. So then Barry Obama met and dated a woman in his sophomore year. Her name was Alexandra McNear. You might remember she's the one that released the letters that Barry wrote to her, where he talked about his homosexual feelings. Like, he says, like, he makes loves to men in his mind. And so he had like homosexual inklings. He then went to Columbia University and still dated Alexandra McNear and was writing her these letters at that time. Anyways, I'm just thinking, like, what part of Barack Obama's life gave him the authority to tell Black men how to act Black in America? What have I been under a rock? Barack Obama had a trans nanny growing up. Okay, so back in 2012, the Associated Press interviewed Evie. This is Evie, by the way, not dressed as a woman, but Evie, whatever. Let's just throw it to a clip and let you watch.
66-year-old Evie walks the streets of her Indonesian slum. She lives in a tiny room, subsisting on money she earns from washing clothes. Evie's meager existence belies a startling truth. She was once nanny to President Barack Obama. Evie says she's always been proud that the person she cared for, drove to school, and cooked for ended up being #1 in the world. The future president was just 8 years old at the time. In the late 1960s, his mother, Ann Dunham, married her second husband and moved to Indonesia. Dunham was impressed by Evie's cooking ability and offered her a job. For 2 years, Evie lived with Obama and his family in this Jakarta home, but she thinks the young Obama didn't know one fundamental truth about her. Born a man, Evie identifies as a woman. Evie says Ann Dunham might have known she was transgendered, but she never dressed as a woman in front of young Barry. And it was a time of brutal dictatorship, when soldiers would beat and round up so-called banshees. Evie says soldiers once shaved off her long black hair and burned her with lit cigarettes. Even today, transgendered people have a difficult time in this largely Muslim nation of 240 million people. This representative of an influential Islamic group says transgendered people are wrong, and they deny the teachings of Islam. And so, Evie has struggled through life, saying she's never found suitable work since Obama and his family left the country in the early 1970s, but she says Obama's election gave her a reason to feel proud for the first time in a long time.
Okay, so elsewhere in the AP's investigation, Evie said this. This is, again, directly from the AP article. He was so young, that's referring to Barry Soetoro, and I never let him see me wearing women's clothes, but he did see me trying on his mother's lipstick sometimes. That used to really crack him up. Then, elsewhere in the piece, they confirm that neighbors of Barry Soetoro and Dunham dispute Evie's claims and say that Evie wasn't just wearing lipstick, but did in fact leave the house wearing female clothes. Here is a photo of Evie, by the way, fully dressed up. I'm speechless, I think. What the hell is going on? That's what I'm asking you. What part of his life? Was it Hawaii? Was it Indonesia? Was it Alexandra McNear? At what point did suddenly, like, Barry Soetoro become the person who gets to tell black men how to act in America? Because that's exactly what he's doing now. That's exactly what he has been doing. Is just because, like, once you do a photo op with Jay-Z or Diddy, suddenly, like, you're just, like, handed an award and gone, okay, now you're black. Now everybody in the black community has to listen to you. Because that's what it seems like. His history and his background is equally as shady as Kamala Harris's, if we are being frank. And they're bringing him out to essentially whip black Americans into shape because, oh, they gave him the black card. So now black people better just listen to Barack Obama. So here he is suddenly lamenting the fact that black men just aren't energetic enough for Kamala Harris. Take a listen.
Is that we have not yet seen the same kinds of energy and turnout in all quarters of our neighborhoods and communities as we saw when I was running. Now, I also want to say that that seems to be more pronounced with the brothers.
The brothers.
So if you don't mind, just for a second, I'm going to speak to y'all and say that when you have a choice that is this clear, when on the one hand you have somebody who grew up like you, knows you, went to college with you, understands the struggles and pain and joy that comes from those experiences. He's had to work harder and do more and overcome and achieves the second highest office in the land.
I'm sorry, Barry Soetoro, but you are going to have to sit your ass down. I got to tell him right now. That's what Barry has to sit his ass down. This is like, she understands the struggle no more than you understand the struggle. Both of you, okay? How does this work? Again, Barack Obama was raised by three extraordinarily wealthy white adults. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that he is not genetically black. He has been honest with the fact that he didn't know his dad, okay? His dad died, I think, when he was in college at some point. He never was raised by him, was never raised around black people ever. That's fine. But why are you speaking to the brothers? Like, when did it become the brothers? What is this? How do three white people raise a strong black brother? I want to know. Is it like grandma and granddad Dunham raised him to be a strong black man, just like Kamala's Indian mother raised her to be a strong Indian woman or something? Like, what's actually happening right now? This is so insulting. And I am the most insulted by this, by the way, because I have dealt with years, the black community telling me that I'm not black because I voted for Trump. Like, you're not black because you're a Republican. Why? Because I see through this stupid BS, this dumb game of thinking you can whip black Americans with some hip hop music, with a Megan Thee Stallion twerking on stage, with Jay-Z and Beyonce marching at a BLM protest, and suddenly King, Queen, LeBron James sending out a tweet. Like, that's literally supposed to motivate me to vote. because I can see through the BS. I look up these people's background. I'm going, what about you is culturally black? Barack Obama is not culturally black. I'm sorry. It's time for us to accept that. Like I said, I was moved by him too in 2008. I thought, oh, okay. Like I really didn't understand his background. And I questioned people who questioned him. But we have to just come to terms with the fact that we have been being played by Democrats for a very long time. And the reality is he is just as shady in terms of his background as Kamala Harris. So I'm now quite obsessed with the curious case of Donald J. Harris, obviously. Kamala notably has an estranged relationship with him. He's said that, she has said that, and we know for a fact that he was a committed communist, and he also married a woman who was similarly a committed communist. That is incredibly relevant, okay? So I decided to obsessively revisit his piece that he wrote, Reflections of a Jamaican Father. And this time I was like, I'm going to fully commit myself to finding out as much as I can about every single line of this piece, particularly, of course, pertaining to his missing mother. That's Beryl, Grandma Beryl, and his grandmother, Iris Finnegan, her great-grandmother that she was posted up with. And so I'm going to pull up this chart now so that you guys can follow along, okay? So we see Donald Harris, and above him, we know that his father is Oscar Joseph Harris, and then we've drawn this line across to Beryl Christie Finnegan. We just can't seem to find outside of that picture of her next to Kamala Harris, okay? And then, of course, above Oscar Joseph, we are told that his parents are Joseph Alexander and Christiana, Miss Christy Brown. So let's actually start, by the way, in the corner there, we have Iris Allen Finnegan. That's Beryl's mother, okay? That is the one that Kamala is pictured with on her lap. She's a baby. Donald says that he photographed that photo of them sometime in the 60s, shortly after Kamala was born. That is our Iris Finnegan. And I said, I'm going to start with her. I'm going to obsessively read this piece. He writes that she is Iris Nay Finnegan. He writes incredibly affectionately about her. What we know is that Iris was born Ora Iris Allen. Okay, it's important for you guys to remember that her maiden name is Allen. But we can't find her anywhere in the Jamaican newspaper archives. Donald tells us in his piece that her ancestry is just completely unknown to him. So he has no idea who this woman, who he alleges had one of the greatest impacts upon his life. He has no idea where she descends from. We also find it a bit off-putting that he doesn't mention her husband by name. He simply calls him Mr. Christie. That would be his grandfather. Just one mention, that Mr. Christie. And guess what? We also could not find her husband, whose name is Patrick Finnegan, anywhere in the newspapers. It's odd because he tells us that they own a farm. He tells us that together, Iris Allen and her husband, Mr. Christie, who we believe should be Patrick Finnegan, he tells us that they own and operate an entire sugarcane farm. So surely I should be able to locate them in the newspapers, a business section, selling, buying something, but no, I could not. Now, I want to be clear, that doesn't mean that we could not find them at all. These people do exist. I can definitively tell you guys that Iris Finnegan did in fact exist. She just didn't own the farm. She worked it. She was an agricultural laborer, okay? So how do we know that Iris Finnegan was an agricultural laborer and not a farm owner? Because of her son, Noel Pendergast. He listed her as an agricultural laborer on his documents for him to come into the United States because he was coming into work as an agricultural laborer. So I'm showing you those documents. Again, this is her son, Noel Finnegan. And you see it says, who is your mother? He writes down Iris Finnegan, and they ask what her occupation is. And he writes an agricultural laborer, okay? So that is incredibly strange, I guess. First and foremost, if your parents owned a sugarcane farm, why would you travel to America for agricultural work on someone else's farm? I feel very deeply in my soul that he, and I'm referring now to Donald Harris, doesn't want us to look too far into this. He doesn't want us to know who his true grandfather is. That's why he just refers to him as Mr. Christie. It's likely not Patrick Finnegan. And of course, we should be looking further into why it is that every time we look up any of these people who he is telling us in this piece owned stuff, they owned stuff and operated things, it turns out that they were just workers. We also were able to confirm, I'm just taking you guys jogging memory, that Iris did in fact birth Beryl Finnegan. We found Beryl Finnegan's birth certificate. We know that Iris Allen is in fact her mother because she is correctly listed on that birth certificate. But oddly, we then find that Beryl too is listed as just a barmaid on her marriage certificate. Her marriage certificate, by the way, as we determined earlier, to a Lawford Newland, who similarly we saw was traveling into the United States as a laborer looking for work. What is going on here? Does this family have money? Do they not have money? Well, I'll remind you, by the way, that I spoke to Donald Harris's brother, and he told me that all of the kids had businesses that were handed to them by their father, Oscar Harris. That Donald and his two other siblings, were handed businesses. So what's happening here? Again, do they have money? Do they not have money? This is getting confusing. The easiest way to determine it would be to look up some records for sugar plantations, because obviously if you're owning a sugar farm, there just has to be some sort of a record for how you inherited it, right? Because we know these were initially plantations that had slaves, and I'm sorry, you weren't just casually putting together a sugar plantation and not having to have any documents whatsoever. He lists in his piece that she worked on the Thatch sugarcane farm. Strangely, I could not find a record of the Thatch Walk sugarcane farm that he listed. I did, however, find a Thatch Hill sugarcane farm, and that was in the exact same St. Anne parish in Jamaica, but the owner of that farm was listed as an Eliza Brown. Brown. Now, you're going Brown. Wait, why does that sound familiar to me? What's wrong with that? Because that's the last name of the other side of Donald J. Harris's family. So something doesn't feel right here. Again, let's just pull up that family map again so I can slow this down for you, okay? Donald J. Harris is supposed to be the son of Oscar Joseph Brown Harris. We didn't put Brown there, but Oscar Joseph Brown Harris, because his mother, you see there, is Chrissy Brown, okay? And Beryl Finnegan, Iris's daughter. But now it's starting to look like maybe that Iris Finnegan worked for the Brown Harris side. Like, what's going on here? Weird. But I said, okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's just take a closer look at the Brown side of the family, who he acknowledges. Like, we had slaves, like that was a thing. We owned plantations. We established Brownstown. He was very honest about that and forthcoming in his piece. So we're going to take a look at this family tree, and we're going to focus on Christiana Brown. Okay, that's supposed to be Oscar Brown's mother, Miss Chrissy. And Donald has told us actually a lot about her in this piece, but we've only got this one picture. And like I said, every one of these pictures, for me, it just looks like a worker that is wearing her Sunday's best. And I'm not trying to be judgmental. I don't know. That's the way these pictures look to me. And that's not the way that he's presenting it. And like I said, he tells us a lot about Christiana Brown. He tells us that she's a descendant of Hamilton Brown, who's on record as a plantation and a slave owner, the founder of Brownstown. He tells us that it was her, that woman, who sparked his interest in economics and in politics, simply by him observing her and listening to her in her daily routine. Okay, so she was very into politics. He tells us that she owned and operated the popular dry goods store on the busy main street leading away from the famous market in the center of Brownstown. Okay, so she is a store owner, and he says in the piece, every day after school, I would go to her shop to wait for the drive home to Orange Hill after she closed the shop. She never paid much attention to the business of the farm at Orange Hill. Her sons took care of that side of the family business. Her constant focus was on the issues that affected her business of buying and selling imported dry goods, as well as the cost of living, issues that required understanding and keeping up with the news, a task which she pursued with gusto. He goes on to write, there was a daily diet of politics as well. She was a great admirer, okay, this is important, she was a great admirer of Busta, Sir William Alexander Bustamante, the chief minister in the colonial government and leader of the Jamaican Labor Party, the JLP. She claimed with conviction and pride to be, herself, Christiana Brown, a laborite, as the members of the JLP were called. And for the interesting reason that, as she argued, labor is at the heart of everything in life. Little did I know it then, what I learned later in studying economics, that my grandmother was espousing her independently discovered version of a labor theory of value, okay? That's what he says, end quote. I want to show you that guy again, who he says his grandmother idolized and she loved him because he was a laborite. So I really focused on that. I was like, who is this guy? Who is this Busta, Sir Busta, that she admired? This guy is very important to Jamaican history, to Jamaican politics, past and present. He was a man that was actually born William Alexander Clark, and he would go on to become the first minister of Jamaica. He's an unbelievably shady character, okay? He left Jamaica at the age of 21 to go to Cuba, and then there's no trace of what he did for 30 years. When he came back, he was a trained commie. He was ready to overthrow government establishments by establishing all of these unions, these worker revolutions that could essentially reshape governments, getting people to riot, okay? We call these color revolutions. The American CIA does this all around the world. You think there's like a normal uprising that's taking place in Ukraine, and then you find out like, wait, why is John McCain in the middle of this, getting people to revolt? And then all of a sudden we are establishing someone as the president. That is the idea of a color revolution. So this guy disappears for 30 years, comes back to Jamaica, and all of a sudden he's organizing regular people to riot and to overthrow. And effectively, people do this so that they can establish power for themselves. So the workers, the working class people think that whatever they're saying to them is because they really care. You're not being treated fairly in this factory, and you need to have the minimum wage. It should be higher. You should be making more for your family. Yeah. And next thing you know, they're rioting, they're overthrowing people that are in power, and who they actually place in power are the people that organized it in the first place. It's just a good old-fashioned commie revolution. Something else of interest is that he also, aside from being arrested by the American government once for, doing commie things and staging these sorts of riots, he also called for the genocide of Rastafarians. Look at this headline. This is a headline of somebody going back and revisiting. Bring in all Rastas, dead or alive. Now, if you're American, you don't know much about what a Rastafarian is. You do know who Bob Marley is. Bob Marley is hate rate Rastafarian. You probably have a depiction probably of just Bob Marley. Like, oh, they smoked pot. Yeah, well, in reality, they were like this religious, socio-political movement of, you had Africans who, after being enslaved, really thought that their enslavement was intentional. Many people who believe this today, that they came from Ethiopia. They were actually incredibly peaceful. They came from Ethiopia, and they felt that they were the people that were being spoken about in the Bible, and that they were intentionally being, like, there was this intentional African diaspora all around the world to remove Black people from their roots. And so these people, this guy, he gets into power, and they actually were incredibly effective in Jamaica in terms of organizing for themselves. They lived in their own encampments, and they also had like agricultural unions. Like they were growing crops and things of their own, and so they were very well established all on their own. And what ended up happening was this guy essentially said that they were dangerous because 6 of them got into trouble. And he said, bring me all of the Rastafarians, dead or alive. And what ended up happening is they started rounding up Rastafarians. I'll actually read you specifically what happened to some of those Rastafarians on his call, because again, he was incredibly powerful. It says on April 12th, Good Friday, Prime Minister Alexander Bustamante, because again, he went on to become the prime minister, ordered the arrest of all Rastafarians that are alive. Police and military forces entered working class neighborhoods and Rastafarian encampments, detaining Rastafarians and forcibly cutting off their dreadlocks. Many Rastafarians were tortured and killed, with estimates suggesting that as many as 150 individuals were detained. So the reason that he ordered for them to even have their dreadlocks forcibly cut off is because it held spiritual meaning for them. Absolutely sick, absolutely disturbing, all of this true, and it's way worse if you look into this guy. I mean, there was like mysterious burnings of all of their crops, particularly when Winston Churchill was visiting. That's another rabbit hole you can jump down, but I wanted to just tell you who this guy was because he makes a note of this in his piece, Donald J. Harris, that Christiana Brown loved this guy. that was her political vision. She loved Bustamante. He just adopted that name, Bustamante, maybe to make it sound like he was a person that was for the people, who knows. So we thought surely this powerful woman, going back to Christiana Brown, who was involved in politics, speaking about politics every day in her dry goods store, and she was so accomplished. She has these stores. She's, like I said, deeply seated, speaking about the Labor Party. She must be mentioned in the newspaper a few times. I mean, there's just no way that we're not going to be able to find her in a newspaper article. And indeed, we did find her. We found her, strangely, as a potential witness to election fraud. Christiana Brown taking the stand in a case pertaining to election fraud. Yes, it is about to get completely crazy, so I hope you guys are following along and this is all making sense so far. Here is where we found Christiana Brown in the Kingston Gleaner. I am showing you the headline here. Witnesses claim they received money to vote for Mr. Allen. Hey, you remember, Iris Allen, her last name was Allen. Okay, maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't, okay? So I'll tell you a little bit about this case because it's super long because it's actually a transcript, which is incredible that they used to print this in the newspaper, but it was a full transcript of the court case that was happening. And this was an election petition. So in 1944, Christiana Brown was made to testify because there was a political election between a guy named Harold Egbert Allen. Harold Egbert Allen was Busta's protege. He eventually went on to become his finance minister, okay? So he was the person that was running, and obviously you could imagine Busta wanted this guy to get elected. And he was running against a guy named T. Adrian Gray. Well, Harold did, in fact, win the election. And remember, Christina, according to Donald J. Harris, was allegedly obsessed with Busta. So surely I'm thinking she must have been very happy that the Labor Party protege, Busta's protege, won. Well, that's where it gets interesting because she was testifying because she apparently had witnessed some guy named S.P. Nugent paying her niece to vote for Allen. So it became this massive scandal because they were quite literally paying people to vote for Allen to get him into office. And so she told the truth to the police officer. She told the truth on the stand. And she just told them, yeah, I witnessed this exchanging of money. Her niece denied it. But I just think that that's quite strange because shouldn't she be happy with this outcome? I'm going, what's happening here? She's on the team of labor. She was devoting her life to speaking about this in her dry goods store. But then buried in this article is an explosive detail in the midst of all the testimony. When the judge asks her, Christiana Brown, what do you do for a living? She answers, I'm a washerwoman. I said, what's a washerwoman? A washerwoman is a woman who quite literally washes, just what it sounds like, just that simple. It means that her job was to wash the clothes and the sheets and to hang them out to dry. Now let's again bring up that photo of Miss Chrissy that Donald shares, okay? Sitting outside, like I said, looks to me like a woman who's wearing her Sunday best potentially for a picture. I never felt that this was a woman who was running a dry goods store and had an active life in politics. I rather did feel that we were missing something here. Why would Christiana Brown, in this case, tell the judge that she was a washerwoman? Maybe it's because Donald is lying about everything. I want to be very clear here. I believe that Donald did know Christiana Brown, the washerwoman. I believe that Donald J. Harris did know Iris Finnegan, the agricultural laborer, and her daughter, Beryl, but I do not believe that they were his kin. I believe they worked for his kin. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's likely that whoever Christiana worked for, whoever's laundry it was that she was washing, were very politically inclined based upon the questions that were being asked of her in that examination. Again, we'll include a link for this on Locals. You can read this yourself. But the questions that they're asking her, it implies to me that clearly wherever she is working, there's a lot of political action happening around her. And if her niece was given money to vote for Allen, it was likely because Allen's political team knew that they worked for a family, that her niece worked for a family that supported Allen, right? You wouldn't go around with cash giving it to these low-level workers on a farm if you weren't sure the people who were running this farm were friendly to your campaign. So that made me go, okay, that name, the last name Allen is at least familiar. I now know that he's connected to Bustamante. I now know that Donald is lying about even Christiana Harris. That's every single relative that they have presented a picture of. They are lying about what they do, and we have documentation of the fact that they are lying about what they do, that these were workers, and they effectively stole their identities and turned them into someone else. So I thought, let me look into this guy who was running, this Harold Egbert Allen, Bustamante's protege, so to speak, that had agents that were going around trying to rig an election with cash, allegedly. Allegedly. I didn't actually see what the conclusion of the case was, but I'm going to guess, given the amount of power that Bustamante had, that he won the election and that the case was just shut down. So again, I'm going to show you this guy again, this Bustamante guy. I started looking into him, and there's some curious facts that came up. Curiously enough, he was married to a woman who came to be known as Lady Idris Allen. Idris Allen. Now, this is pure speculation, but in my head, I'm just taking you through my thought process. I was like, that sounds like Iris Allen, but it's Idris Allen. Okay, whatever, but like that's who he's married to. And then I sort of came to the conclusion that actually that Idris Allen, you can show a picture of her again. I think she's the real person who raised Donald Harris. I believe that she is actually potentially Donald Harris's true mother. And it's why she doesn't speak about Beryl and he won't speak about his mother, because I think that is his mother, and I'm going to tell you why. Idris Allen began her career as a clerk working at a dry goods store called Sherlock and Smith. She soon began working at a department supervisor of another dry goods store, Nathan & Co. Limited, and she worked and operated that store for 10 years. And of course, don't even get me started, she was steep in labor right politics, because look who she eventually married. They stayed married for 10 years, or a little more than 10 years. They got married in 1941, and then he literally, it says, died suddenly in 1953. So they were married for 12 years. She fought extensively for social welfare programs, otherwise known as hand your kids to the state. She was a good commie. And let me tell you what's interesting about that. You see, I noticed this thing that it tends to be the people that fight the hardest for social welfare programs. When you look into their families, it turns out that they were the ones that owned the slaves. Why do you think it would be that the people that owned the slaves and clearly did not believe in social welfare suddenly became the most vigorous, loudest voices for social equality? These were the people that were establishing the unions. Does that make sense to you? You have to actually think like a slave owner for a second, right? So you're a slave owner, you're running a plantation, business is good. Like you are the boss of everything, okay? It's like, yep, don't care what's happening to the slaves, whipping slaves, turning out profit. And then suddenly the government says no more slavery. We're going to pay you for your slaves like they did for the descendants of Hamilton Brown. We know that Kamala's family got what would effectively have been $11 million for their slaves. The British government did pay them for their slaves in Jamaica, okay? But you're not just going to be like cool with having lost all of your power. You're going to organize and figure out how to maintain your power again. You don't just go, oh, well, now I love you. I know yesterday we were whipping you, but now I love you, slave. That doesn't make sense, okay? So slavery gets abolished. And in about 1883, the UK abolishes slavery. Or I guess the British Empire abolishes slavery, and that means Jamaica, and that's why they've got to release their slaves. And most of the slaves stay on, like my grandparents' descendants stayed on and became like sharecroppers. They just worked the farms because they didn't really know what to do with their lives. And then those slave owners got together and started planning, like, how do we just re-enslave them in a different way? And that tool to re-enslave them is government. You get your family involved in politics, and then you tell those former slaves that you're fighting for their freedom. And all they have to do is keep fighting for more governance. What is more governance? It's slavery. It's slavery. But you dress it up as freedom. You know, you're like, oh, social welfare programs. Like, we're going to have your kids. We're going to raise your kids. We're going to do this. We're going to offer you free handouts. And suddenly the next thing you know, you're being taxed into oblivion. And all of your money, all of your earnings, you think you're working and you're independent, but your earnings are actually going to the very same people that enslaved you. So yes, I find it interesting that Idris got so involved. The descendant of wealthy slave owners from Barbados got so involved in labor politics and was really cared about social politics, wanted to make sure about the social welfare of people was okay. What does that sound like to you? This is what it sounds like to me. And then you have Mr. Christie still, who knows? I have no idea, still don't know why we're referring to a Mr. Christie in this piece. I have no idea who it is. But what we do learn about Harold Allen, which I found interesting, so Idris's husband, is that he was also the headmaster of Titchfield Upper School. Now, if you remember a couple of episodes, I told you that the first time we can find a trace of Donald J. Harris, it's at Titchfield Upper School. He's listed, he's like 17 years old, and he's listed there. It's just a school photo, and his name happens to pop up as a 17-year-old. Otherwise, it's been very difficult to find anything on him. Do you guys understand like what I am piecing together here? It is my view today that Kamala Harris descends from a long line of wealthy slave owners who then turned into communist leaders with the explicit goal of overthrowing countries and overriding people's independent freedom under the guise of offering them more freedom, more handouts. This seems to be the picture that we are painting on both sides of her family. Her mother came from a wealthy Indian communist family, okay? Now we know, or I have a suspicion, that her father as well came from a wealthy family of slave owners. There was just no way. There was no way, okay? If there was a way, I would buy a lottery ticket, that all three of the relatives that they listed, Christiana Brown, Beryl, and Miss Iris, that all three we can find records of, but we find them records as workers and not the owners that they allege that they were. Unless this is a case of stolen identity, unless we are looking at something that is so diabolical and sick that they stole the identity of all of them because they needed to create a family tree that would obscure Kamala's true heritage. Why on earth would you need to be exceedingly private about who your mother was? Unless she was someone who was very powerful, who was very connected, and someone who was very involved in politics, unless she was someone who was in support of a man who was rounding up and calling for the extermination of Rastafarians. And you needed the public to believe, despite having that in your line, yes, let's exterminate the Rastafarians. You were going to be so sick and twisted as to sell to the American public that this woman was the first black female president of the United States. Yeah, you'd want to cover that up. So I have a lot of questions here, and I think it, like I said, it is very likely that Donald Harris actually knew these people because according to just what I've been able to research, and I've been researching this all day, his mother, or who I believe could be his mother, Idris Allen, was very, very busy. By all accounts, she traveled a lot, and so he would have been raised and had meaningful relationships with the help on hand. So he's just pretty much merging his memories. This is my mom. She did actually own a dry goods store. She's in and out. She's traveling with politics. She's in the Barbados Islands. She's here and she's there. And then I'm plausibly being raised by Miss Iris, right? Plausibly being shown things by whoever he is fading that memory in with Christiana Brown, the laundress. He's plausibly around these people while his mom is traveling. And that, again, would explain why Donald Harris has been so private about his mother. Somebody reminded me that she had already been on Power 105 back in 2019 when she was running for president. And I cannot believe that I forgot to mention that interview because it's actually quite significant to all of our research. It's the only time, remember, her father is notoriously private and he rarely speaks out, but it is the only time that he spoke out regarding her campaign, and he was angry and he spoke out against her after she said this. Take a listen.
So, and I know the answer to this too. They say you oppose legalizing weed.
That's not true.
I know.
and look, I joke about it, half joking. Half my family's from Jamaica. Are you kidding me?
They be so mad at you.
Right. Yeah. No, I do not. No.
So she was leaning into a Rastafarian stereotype. My family is from Jamaica, smoking pot, dreadlocks, and they're all laughing like, oh yeah, that's how it is. And her dad had a visceral reaction to this. Like Donald Harris was like, what the heck is this? He immediately issued an unsolicited public statement to Jamaican Global Online. Jamaican Global Online is also the same online publication that he published his piece in just a few months earlier. So he basically did a 180 and was like, no, what is this? He issued this statement. He wrote, "My dear departed grandmothers, whose extraordinary legacy I described in a recent essay on this website, as well as my deceased parents, must be turning in their grave right now to see their family's name, reputation, and proud Jamaican identity being connected in any way, jokingly or not, with the fraudulent stereotype of a pot-smoking joy seeker and in pursuit of identity politics. Speaking for myself and my immediate Jamaican family, we wish to categorically dissociate ourselves from this travesty." That was a major clue that what we had uncovered about her alleged grandmother, Christiana Brown, and I don't believe Christiana Brown is that picture that we saw is actually who Christiana Brown is. But remember, before I went away, I was telling you guys that they were massive supporters of a politician named Alexander Bustamante who called for the genocide of Rastafarians, okay? So if you wanted to genocide Rastafarians and then suddenly you see that she's leaning into a stereotype of Rastafarians, you would react in the way that he did, okay? He reacted in the way that his grandmother raised him to.
Have you ever heard of Samuel Hinckley?
Is he related to John Hinckley? No.
Hinkley, Hinkley. Look him up.
Is he related to the Hinckley that
Cape Cod?
shot?
No. Remotely, but he had 7 of his descendants who were U.S. presidents, one who was a U.S. vice president, one who was governor of Alaska, several billionaires. And what you find is, if you look up Samuel Hinckley, they will note some of his more interesting modern relatives or descendants. So here's the way it breaks down. Lolo Soetoro.
This is Barack, just so everyone's watching, that's Barack Obama's stepfather, who he was raised with for the first 8 years of his life.
Okay, well, the rest of his life afterwards, Barry Soetoro has an interesting situation. His mother, on his maternal side, his grandfather was first cousin to President George Herbert Walker Bush. So George Herbert Walker Bush, Dick Cheney, vice president, they're all cousins. Sarah Palin is a cousin. Barack Obama is a cousin. George Herbert Walker, who founds Halliburton, is Uncle Herbie to all of them. And interestingly, when he was running against John McCain's running partner was his cousin, Sarah Palin, who was governor of Alaska. Real unholy alliance, right? So other thing is the Bushes for the last 150 years have been supplying international intelligence, and they were into what they call paper entrepreneurialism. They would acquire businesses and sell the components off. Uncle Herbie founded Halliburton, had something to do with Enron as well, which was energy development. Lolo Soetoro was international executive vice president for Standard Oil, and he was in the oil business, but he also ran the death squads for the Indonesian army.
Oh, it's funny because when you look him up, it just says that, like, you know, what do they say that no, he was an engineer? Whatever they say, it's like he did. They make it seem like he did. Oh, he was a geographer. That's what it says. It says that he was a geographer who did some work for the government.
I had a brother who was into that, and then the oil petroleum production was part of it. Anyway, you get Lolo Soetoro running the death squads for the Indonesian government, so that meant you had money. Indonesia might have had access to the world's largest oil reserves as they were perceived at the time. So Standard Oil used his muscle and his position to take over the oil industry in Indonesia, which they couldn't do under American law. So George Herbert Walker Bush, under the auspices of Uncle Herbie, George Herbert Walker, sets up Zapata Oil. they have a family holding company, Zapata Offshore Oil, which was chartered in Kuwait, by the way. Keep that in mind. And what winds up happening is George Herbert Walker, dealt with Lolo Soetoro quite frequently on oil deals. And remember, George Herbert Walker becomes chief of the CIA under the Ford administration, and he deals with their #1 contract guy over in Asia, which when the NAM was going on, Lolo ran intelligence for the CIA under contract in China, North Korea, North Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Indonesia. So Barack's grandmother hustles her daughter, who was 17 at the time, into a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship with Barack Obama Sr., who was being recruited from Kenya to offset Jomo Kenyatta in the Mau Mau. That was a CIA project. Grandmommy was vice president of a Hawaiian bank, and she distributed the funds for the CIA in the South and Northwest Pacific at the time.
That explains
so
what they were doing out in Hawaii.
She puts him together with her daughter, who was 17 years old. Barack is born, and then they quickly go their separate ways, and then grandmommy gets daughter and hooks her up with Lolo Soetoro. And remember, grandmommy is married to President Bush's first cousin. So
That's incredible.
that's where you get this, and then you get...
So Barack Obama's grandmother, the one who raised him in Hawaii, is married to, so his grandfather is married to...
in other words, the grandfather is Bush's cousin.
First cousin.
Yeah, and they're all nephews to Uncle Herbie, who founded Halliburton in 1946 in Oklahoma. It had previously been chartered under that name in 1919 in Oklahoma, but it went defunct, so he revived it. You, with your situation, you are well aware of the Commonwealth, right? Okay. Your in-laws.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, that was Hong Kong, Singapore, that was Nigeria, that was Kenya, South Africa, that was Pakistan, that was India, that
Jamaica.
was Jamaica, man. That was the Bahamas, that was Barbados, that was New Zealand, that was Australia. So I used to get to Jamaica an awful lot, so you hear somebody, hey man, everything gonna be all right, man, how do you mind? Speaking patois, and you turn around and there's somebody Chinese talking like they're going, oh, wow. Well, see, it's the British Commonwealth, before that, the British Empire, so everybody travels freely around there. Now, I have a friend that's married to a Jamaican. She was born in Jamaica. So were her parents, but she's English aristocracy, and I won't mention the name, but they're related to the English royals. She's blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and she was born in Jamaica because her aristocratic parents just happened to be over there, and they were born when their aristocratic English nobility parents were born in the place. So it's an interesting thing when you see that, and it's St. Elizabeth Parish, where all of the high, bright, and white Jamaicans are, and it's an interesting little hookup. So we get an international thing, but there is a family situation that gets in here, and Kamala's folk were trying to get in on it through the mother because they were Hindu. Now, the dad said his background is Irish and also from India, the Hindu thing, and he became a Marxist because that was what was going on back when he was coming of age in the early 1960s. Now, I had places all over the country, and I had 2 places in Aspen, Colorado. So my ex was a social climber, and she was a ski instructor up in Aspen, of all things. So everybody wanted to go skiing with Mrs. Brown in the backcountry. So we wound up meeting billionaires and really multi-millionaires. And it's interesting because there are these family connections that are not obvious, except when you walk around Aspen. It's awful. Everybody starts at 6'1" for the females and gets up to these guys that all look like Adonis, that are these great athletes. You know, it's like, damn, man, they've been breeding, you know, smart and, you know, good looking and athletic. And they all have these interesting relationships with each other that aren't obvious and that they don't make public. You had, starting with the Adams family, you had President Adams and his son, President Adams. You had the Roosevelts, Teddy Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You had the Kennedys, and, you know, and then they had muscle because Joe Kennedy Sr. was a gangster. He was a bootlegger, and he used
That's how they established Hollywood, by the way. It was a bunch of gang members that established Hollywood. The bootleggers went in there, carnies.
Yeah, I'll tell you some stuff off the record about that. Yeah. So it's like you get this whole thing, and then you get the Bushes in here, and then you have the Clintons, who are newbies into this whole thing, and now you have some other stuff that's going on, these peripherals.
Well, it's funny you say that the Clintons are newbies, though, because even like Bill Clinton has like a weird story. Like his dad was killed in a car accident when he was like 2. It's like once you start looking into their genealogy, they all kind of have like these weird tragic stories, and then they're just kind of become the president. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, I've lived around a lot of people who have like don't have a dad. Like they don't really go on to like go to Harvard and Yale and become president. So it's like, it just makes you wonder, like, what is actually happening here?
And then you find something else. Look at Barack Obama. What kind of connection does Barack Obama or Barry Soetoro have with the United States? He's got a long history through his mother's side of the family. They were slave owners, and 2 of his ancestors were Confederate officers during the Civil War. One even rode with Cantrell, the guerrilla, up in Kansas and Missouri. He's got a connection. But even if you get away from whether or not Kamala is black, what connection does she have with the United States? Probably the least out of any candidate for president in this country's history. So you have a situation where her parents have academic visas. They're transitory. They have no intention of being permanent residents or citizens. It's passing through. And she lies a lot about it, but you've seen that, you know, when she got to Canada, how old she was, and that's her background.
Graduated from high school, wealthy, Canadian.
The whole 9 yards. And she doesn't have that American vibe where you from elementary school are taught about what this country's supposed to be about. You have this thing where it's part of the Commonwealth, so they're subjects. Now, you probably have talked to your husband about that, and your father-in-law, the Earl, a citizen.
It's very different. Across the pond is very different.
Very different. But that's the background with Kamala, the way she was brought up. And you get the feeling that somebody is trying to become part of something, but they don't want anybody with any real connection. The more isolated they are, the more they're subject to convenient control. You know, today is tomorrow, which is why yesterday is tomorrow too, which is why we all, you know, that word salad nonsense, which is you've got a silly somebody that's lazy, that's not the brightest bulb on the shelf, and is easily manipulated because somebody has done what in Hollywood they call the casting couch routine to get where they are. But at some point, if you get to the top with the casting couch, the problem is that there's nobody to sleep with after a certain point. You have to have the raw talent, and if you don't have the talent, then you're not going to do anything much. And that's what our problem is. It's who is behind her and who is controlling her. Vote black if you're black, so you don't deal with the qualifications. You just vote.
Yeah,
Skin is
sure.
kin. But the problem is,
But
she's
they voted for Joe
lying
Biden. He
about
can't even
that.
speak.
But the other problem is, and I don't have anything against it, you're supposed to vote for her because she's black, but she's got a white husband. So the bottom line is if she can sleep with the white husband, then you can vote for a white man for president without any feelings of guilt.
Right.
Kamala, which, by the way, is the name of a Hindu goddess, and it's not a black name. It's a Hindu name. And you've got her, she's isolated because who are her relatives? You know, one of her relatives by marriage, his name is Jesse Smollett, the one that got caught up with that fraud thing. He's her nephew by marriage. Okay? You get this little picture, a family connection and the noose around the neck. And by the way, I interviewed several Chicago detectives and police on that, and I happen to know one that's a cop. He's back in the DMV area now. And Jussie and the bunch had been planning this for months, and they used to discuss it at this particular athletic club, and everybody knew it. And they got pictures of Jussie Smollett buying this noose during Halloween season at a costume shop. They've got it on video, and on security cameras, you can see him putting the noose around his own neck. And he had met with Kamala just before that, and she and Cory Booker, this is the same day when he flew into Chicago. They had been working on something that Conyers came up with in 1997 that is now modified and introduced as the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill.
Wow.
Remember the neck?
Yes.
And the whole thing, they went off and then they had to withdraw it because of the fraud that came out.
Wow.
Well, see, this is something they're trying to do, and maybe this will give you an idea of how they're sneaking around here. The Emmett Till anti-lynch bill has nothing to do with black people.
No bill they put up has anything to do with black people.
No.
Or just the headline, but then when you read
the headline does.
Yeah.
But what it does is it puts into the American federal criminal laws for the first time sexual orientation as a victim category for criminal offenses. Now, when you think of a lynching, you think of a mob killing somebody, right? Well, the Emmett Till anti-lynch bill, one, doesn't require a mob. It can be one person. It doesn't even require a homicide. You can kidnap somebody or beat somebody. And how does that play out? What happens, let's say you have a guy who's broken up with his girlfriend or his wife, and he's feeling down, and some of his friends say, hey, man, let's go to the club. So he goes to the club with his homeboys, and he's dancing with this PYT, pretty young thing, in a tight, short dress, big boobs, hoop earrings, braids, down her back, and they're having a good time exchanging spit over in the shadows and drinking wine. And then he looks down. Man, you got a heart? What are you? You got a heart on. And he busts him in the mouth. Now that's federal lynching.
Wow.
So what they did with it, you see this bait and switch. Also, look at the Black Caucus. They love Kamala because she's just as big a fake as they are. If you examine the voting records for the Black Caucus, you will find something very interesting.
Is it really the Rainbow Coalition?
Yeah, because they're a member of the Liberty Caucus, which is the LGBTQIA plus caucus in Congress. I think all but 4 or 5 of them. And they do more work for the Liberty Caucus than they do for the Black Caucus. Now, we have in Memphis, for the 9th District of Tennessee, we have Steve Cohen. He's white, he's Jewish. He's gay. And guess what? He is chairman of the Black Caucus's Reparations Committee. So he's also holds that same position for the Liberty Caucus. So what is this? When you look at 5 years ago, they had that circus for 2 weeks about whether to have a formal committee set up to study reparations. And then 2 weeks later, on the first voice vote, no debate, they passed what's known as, quote, the Gay Reparations Act.
Okay, so this is what we're doing is we're using black people as a smokescreen to allow
and that's what they're doing with
LGBTQ
Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
You take a significant voting group that has emotive needs and cravings to belong, and here you give them an opportunity to identify with somebody who has absolutely no connections with them. Even if it was black, she's not somebody who has a prior generation in America. She is the immigrant herself because her parents were not immigrants. She is the immigrant. And by a technical call, she's qualified to run for president. See, the Constitution defines citizenship in 2 places. 1, how to be a citizen, and 2, qualifications for being president or vice president. So technically, you can be a citizen, but you can't be president, like, say, Cruz down in Texas. He ran, but nobody brought it up. He was born in Canada, so he was not born on American soil. But see, Kamala was born in the same hospital my ex-wife was born in when my now late mother-in-law was a paternity nurse in that same hospital. So she's born on American soil. So I don't think they had any intention of having somebody just come in right there and getting in that easy way, but she matches the bare bones qualifications. But you get somebody like that, they're easy to manipulate and control because they've got no connections with this place.
I think it's quite a tell that Kamala doesn't have any children of her own. It's something that I think is concerning. I know that the left freaked out and Taylor Swift posted a picture of her with a cat when J.D. Vance accurately said that you don't want a bunch of like childless cat ladies running things. And I agree with that. And I also agree that similarly in the exact same vein that it is concerning when you have basically a coalition of childless cat women and so many homosexual men, people like Cory Booker. I don't know if everybody knows he's homosexual, but and in these positions of power who are informing policy very removed from a certain kind of compassion. And I know people, they tried to make it seem like you meant, oh, women that are struggling with fertility issues. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that have zero inclination, desire toward family, but they want power, right? And it genuinely scares me when I think about this because they are naturally nihilistic. Where they gain that power and that assertion from within themselves, to me, is quite troubling. I say to people, pause, forget what you think about Kamala, whether you're voting for her, whether you're not voting for her. We've now established as a fact that she put a fake woman in her book and tried to present this black woman as her grandmother. What kind of a person
would do that?
Yes. Like, what do you think about what that takes to find the photo, whether it's photoshopped, whether it's a photo of you with a different person, whatever, you put it in your book, you lie, you are sealing the identity of a black person, knowing that actually you descend from slave owners, right? And you feel nothing. And you keep this up because you realize nobody's fact-checked it. You're going around, you're trying to blackify yourself, and you feel nothing. What does that tell you about what that person is capable of? That they don't have basic morality.
Ruthless, unprincipled person. And you pointed this out earlier. What happens when you have no legacy?
Yeah.
You don't have any interest in continuity. You're not thinking like you do when you have children, grandchildren, or when you adopt somebody who is actually a child and you participate in raising them. Mm-hmm. And I hate to do this as an analogy, but dogs are part of our families, right? People love their dogs, but you didn't have the dog, you adopted the dog. Well, if you adopt a child, that becomes your child. You raise that child. Now, she adopted 2 teenagers, which, you know, that doesn't count. They're already
Wait,
grown.
who adopted a teenager?
She adopted her husband's 2 children.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't count.
No.
So what happens is, what is her stake in tomorrow? I mean, if you went out and you adopted a 9-month-old, a year-and-a-half, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, and you're raising them, you've got an interest in tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
But you see, that's like that example I gave you of, you know, you come down the jungle trail with an antelope across your shoulders and you see this war party about to fall on your village. Nobody's looking. Do you sneak off or do you sound the alarm and maybe die to sacrifice for your village and your people and your descendants, or do you just turn around and run?
Kamala turns around and runs.
Yeah.
She has no stake in tomorrow.
No stake in this. And her connections are suspect, but her connections make her vulnerable. It's like, I was in California when a lot of this was going on, and she and Willie Brown got detailed in the LA Times and the San Francisco Chronicle a lot about what they were doing. So you're in your 20s, and this is 30 years ago, and you're getting paid $72,000 a month for showing up at 2 meetings a month, maybe 15 hours for the month, and everybody else on this panel that you're on is 65 to 70 years old with a lifetime in medicine, and you have absolutely no medical background, and you're getting paid $72,000 a year because you're a mistress to somebody that's 60 years old and has put you in there, and then he gets you sort of promotion to another aspect of this same setup, and you get $120,000 a year for showing up for 2 meetings a month, and she misses 20% of them. And this is 30 years ago. $120,000 30 years ago is making $250,000 now.
Wow. And people need to know this is the true story of Kamala. People aren't making this up because it's election season. You can go back and read the article in the LA Times, San Francisco Chronicle. I've read them. They were basically like, this woman is sleeping around and she's making a ton of money. You know, she slept with Willie Brown and he's just putting her into
Montiel.
Yeah, that's right. Putting her into positions of power.
And then there's the other thing too. They talked about how she got on with the DA's office in Alameda County and also some other things, and even getting to be U.S. Senator, which I found very peculiar because, you know, now senators are elected by constitutional amendment. They used to be appointed by the states. She is the first person, the only person in California's history to run with no Republican opponent for U.S. Senator.
Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah, see, it's interesting, the whole 9 yards. And then there's another suspect thing, One West Bank. George Soros was the major investor in One West Bank. Mnuchin, later the Obama administration, and for 1 year in the Trump administration before he got fired, he was CEO. This is when they were having that mortgage foreclosure fraud situation. All right? I had 3 neighbors lost their properties behind this fraud. So just about every county in California returned indictments against Mnuchin and One West Bank. There were 5,200 plus counts of indictments returned. 5,200. Well, Soros and Mnuchin raised a lot of money for Kamala, quite a few $1 million for her to run for the office of Attorney General of the state of California. When she got elected, she used her authority to consolidate all of these indictment counts and dismiss them. 3 weeks later, George Soros sells One West Bank for $3.42 billion. And then they raised a lot of money to get her elected as U.S. Senator without Republican opposition. Now, can you imagine California with no Republican candidate running against the Democratic Party candidate?
Incredible.
See, that's how she gets in. And at that point, she was Indian.
Oh, yeah. She was sworn in as Indian.
Yeah. So she wasn't talking about being black. I find something else, too. If you are part white and you're part black, what are you as far as Americans concerned? You're black. If you're part Asian and part black, America takes you as black. So how does she get to be Indian, recognized as such, if she's got black in her? She doesn't.
No, she's without question Irish Indian. There's no question about it.
No.
She's Irish Indian.
She was not one that put in a lot of work when she prepared for a case. She'd shorten her hemline up every day of the trial, and somebody's supposed to be impressed. And we have somebody that counted on other people doing the work, and she did the casting couch thing to get to the top. But at the top, what are you going to do?
Exactly. If you're not
going to
qualified.
deal with Putin? He's probably got something waiting in the far wing of the Kremlin that looks a lot better than this 60-year-old woman. Xi Jinping, you know, he's going to be inscrutable and no.
When you get to this, I'm so excited. I obviously heard that Kamala appeared on the Call Her Daddy podcast.
I'm curious, like, you don't do too many long form interviews. What made you want to do Call Her Daddy today?
What I love about what you do is that your voice in your show is really about your listeners. This is a moment in the country and in life where people really want to know they're seen and heard and that they're part of a community.
I am really doing this as a journalistic endeavor because it's important to understand who Kamala Harris is. When she gave you that word salad about the community of Call Her Daddy, this is what she's referring to. Take a listen.
What are your go-to favorite sex positions?
I am so basic. I love missionary.
I love missionary too. I think it's great.
You want titties.
I wanted titties. I said, I don't care what's on trend. Give me 1990s stripper titties.
Kamala's community.
I would like to know how you all feel about this situation, and while you are letting me know, could you please like and share this video and subscribe to Geneva's Closet if you haven't already done so right here on YouTube. And you can follow me on Facebook at Geneva's Closet, and you can email me at genevascloset22@gmail.com. You all have a fabulous day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.